Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robyn Vincent. Today on the program, we continue our series with candidates running for a position that has the power to shape many aspects of the community. The role of judge in Detroit's 36th District Court. We'll hear from a magistrate who's running for that position.
Plus, a new Filipino coffee shop opened this month along Woodward and New Center. We'll hear what inspired that space from the owner of JP's Makes and Bakes.
Also, how do we close Detroit's digital divide? We'll talk with some change makers in this space. This and more. But first, it's news from NPR.
But first, we have lead water service lines.
We heard the news.
We did hear the news sometime.
Let's take it back.
Let's take it back, and we're going to go back to the lead water service lines. And unfortunately, hard to escape in the U.S.
According to the National Institute of Health, most of the lead service lines were installed in the 1800s, and by the 1900s,
70% of cities with more than 30,000 people in the U.S. have had lead service lines. Detroit falls into that historical category.
Now, this material, with ties to the Industrial Revolution, has contributed to a public health crisis in cities like Flint and Benton Harbor.
And now, a new innovation is helping rid Detroit of these bad pipes.
U of M professor Eric Schwartz is the co-founder of the Blue Conduit. He joins us to discuss how his company is using artificial intelligence to find lead service lines in the city.
Professor Schwartz, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. How did Blue Conduit begin using AI to identify lead service lines? It's such an interesting topic.
Well, thanks. And it really all starts in the city of Flint. And the peak international news media attention to the Flint water crisis in 2016, a colleague of mine, Jake Abernathy, a professor here at U of M, and a bunch of students just started having conversations with folks in Flint and asking, so if the water's being contaminated from these lead pipes, where are they? And the answer was, we don't really know. And then, well, how many are there? We don't really know. And we're data nerds. We're data scientists. And we said, well, maybe we can get some data that could help us predict which kinds of houses, which kinds of addresses have lead service lines and which ones don't. And that's really where it started.
Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, you had the Flint residents there getting involved, asking questions, and you guys decided to answer some of those questions. So, by these days, we don't hear a lot about the lead service lines. When you are looking through the data, especially past data and now future data and present data, how big of a problem is lead in American cities today? And what is the scale that we're talking about here?
This is a massive problem, and it is not just Flint or Detroit or Benton Harbor problem. It's not just a Michigan problem. It's a nationwide problem because the records just weren't really kept so great. We don't really know what was installed 100 years ago or 50 years ago, unfortunately, and it's really costly to dig them up. There aren't technologies to just detect the material from above ground. And so the cost, although the federal bipartisan infrastructure law has provided $15 billion, that's just not enough. Wow. The estimates are upwards of 70, 80, 90 billion dollars for the nation. And we just can't dig everywhere. There's just not enough money. And even if that were the case, we want to find the lead as quickly as possible. We want to get to reduce the time that folks are living exposed to lead contamination. So the order of where we go next really matters. And that's what Blue Conduit has been dedicated to, is how can we take whatever money is available and get as much lead out as possible, as quickly as possible.
And, Professor Schwartz, we learned a little bit about lead service lines, of course, throughout time, history, and we know the risks and the harmful effects of lead. So can we reiterate that a little bit and go into it and remind folks what actually happens when you are exposed long-term to lead?
Sure. Lead is a neurotoxin that causes brain damage to children, and that means to pregnant mothers or to infants or to young children. And it is extremely serious, the long-term irreversible consequences. And even to adults, there's now quite a bit of evidence that shows that chronic exposure to it as adults also has cardiac impacts and cardiac health damages. So lead, however it's getting into your body, is a toxin and a problem. Yeah. Water is one of several ways. Lead paint has typically been the more prominent way that folks are thinking about it. But lead paint is usually on private property. Mm-hmm. The lead in the water is lead in pipes that are largely either public property or installed by some public utility. So it's a very different level of responsibility now that the local governments and federal government have to get it out of the ground.
And Professor Schwartz, so you began your data collection in Flint and now moving into Detroit as well. Do you know now and have a better grasp and understanding where the lead water service lines are? And how has that AI technology helped you all identify some of the service lines you have been able to find?
Well, in Detroit, it's been a tremendous help. Mm-hmm. The folks working in the Detroit Water and Sewer Department have been excellent, and they've been out in front of this problem and really innovative. You'll see in Detroit billboards communicating to residents about the presence of lead and about the presence of folks on your block trying to replace that lead. What we've been able to do with Detroit is they had a ton of unknowns. So out of unknowns, I mean, we don't know the material of these pipes. We know some of them were lead. We know some were not lead, copper, let's say. Those were established. They have records on those. But we're talking 200, 300,000 pipes where we didn't know the materials. Mm-hmm. And what we've been able to do by using statistics, machine learning, AI, is to say, here are the ones that are most likely to be lead. Of those that were unknown, here are the ones that are least likely. And here's even a rank-ordered list. Here's the probability of each one being lead. And by doing that, we've been able to more focus efforts. So the city of Detroit's water department has been able to target the neighborhoods that have the highest likelihood of lead, block by block. I was just in Detroit on Tuesday at a site of a lead service line replacement, and they targeted that block because they saw from their data, from our predictions, there was a high concentration of lead service lines on that block. We had been predicting a high likelihood of 85% chance of lead for almost all the houses on that block. And sure enough, they went up and down the block and were replacing the lead on that street.
If you're just joining us. Go ahead, Professor.
Just so the challenge in Detroit is it's just so vast and there's so much area. And it's really inefficient to go to one house over here, one neighborhood there. So to focus that effort and really focus where the lead is, and also where there are other factors that are important. Where are the children most likely living? Where's a higher concentration of children or lower income folks that won't be able to replace these pipes on their own? And that's what we're using to combine with the chance of lead, is to help cities like Detroit make these decisions of prioritizing where to go next.
We're speaking with University of Michigan professor Eric Schwartz, co-founder of Blue Conduit, about using AI to find lead service lines in Detroit. Now, WDET reporter Brianna Tinsley was recently at one of these lead service line replacement sites that you're talking about, Professor Schwartz, and it used Blue Conduit's tech. Here's a clip from Water and Sewerage Director Gary Brown talking about why they chose the Pingree Park neighborhood for the work.
This is a neighborhood with a lot of kids. It's a disadvantaged community. Economically, it has been ignored for a long time. So this is why we're here and not in Rosedale Park or Palmer Woods or Sherwood Forest.
So, Professor Schwartz, some neighborhoods that are traditionally wealthy will have better records, easier to identify lead lines, and then poorer areas will have less robust records, right?
That's right. And that distinction makes a big difference in trying to find where the lead is.
Okay, so it's important to understand the data, but it's also important to understand the story that the data tells us. What are we learning from the data when it comes to, very specifically, environmental racism?
Yeah. One thing that we are seeing, and this is just across the country, is a lot of the typical factors that you would associate with environmental racism, environmental injustices, appear in the way that we see this data. So the presence of records that correspond to what's actually underground might be more common in areas that are, say, wealthier, like you were just saying. And what that means is if you were to just take the data as it is and use the latest and greatest artificial intelligence, or call it machine learning, what you're going to do is you're going to identify those patterns and then propagate them into predictions when you try to figure out where the lead is elsewhere beyond the data that you had. And that's not good. That's exactly what we want to avoid. We don't want to propagate those same and perpetuate those same biases. And so what we often say on the team is at Blue Conduit, the biases that we think of from an environmental justice perspective and the statistical biases of, is this estimate of how much lead is there? Is that correct? Is that accurate? Is it reliable? Those are aligned. And so what we do is we work really hard to avoid and reduce those biases. One way we do this is we work with cities like Detroit, and we say early on in our engagement, and as they're using our program, our software, we say, here's a list of addresses that would be really important to go to so that it'll help us paint a more reflective picture, a picture of the entire city that's more representative of all of the city. And by getting that data, we can then even improve the models better. So we can use this representative data instead of the unrepresentative bias data, and then we can estimate what is the likelihood of lead at every house. And we're going to do that in a much less biased way by understanding that we have data that reflects the whole city now. And so the estimates are also going to be reflective of the patterns of why certain ages and certain decades in one neighborhood might be correlated, associated with lead, but it might not be the case in other neighborhoods. And we can figure that out. We can learn that.
Professor Schwartz, I'm wondering if it was front of mind for you, this notion that your work was going to make this kind of dent in racial inequality.
By starting in Flint, it was absolutely apparent. And in Flint, it really was a case that it was because it was Flint that was already clear that this was about environmental injustice. And so when we started Blue Conduit, well, we really just wanted to find a way to have the greatest impact that we could through whatever vehicle, commercial or otherwise. And we understood that this started as a research project. It started with a community-engaged collaboration with folks in Flint, with students at the University of Michigan, with regulators in the state and folks in the city. We just wanted to figure out a way to have the biggest impact. So we understood that this was a social enterprise, and we wanted to do that. And Blue Conduit has continued to have that ethos and that mission and that vision, and that's what we're doing today. We're going on beyond just lead pipes, but identifying other assets buried underground or difficult to inspect to really help to revolutionize municipal infrastructure management using AI and doing it for good to help the public.
Well, and that's the thing, though. Using AI is quite integral to this work, and we know there's a lot of skepticism around AI. So I'm wondering, what are some of the limitations with using artificial intelligence?
One of the limitations, I think, is going back to that biased data. It is really difficult to somehow reverse the biases in the data. You can in some ways, but you're never quite sure. The right way to do it is to get representative data, and that's one thing that we're doing. But in some cases, it's really hard to do, and it's very costly. So I think one challenge around thinking AI can solve everything is, well, it really depends on the quality of that data. The other thing is you can generate the predictions. We can generate the probability of lead at every house, and perhaps they could be really accurate and reliable. But there has to be a decision. Someone needs to make a decision based on that, and it needs to be explainable, needs to be interpretable, it needs to be useful. And so the challenge of just providing, say, predictive models alone doesn't go all the way to the finish line. And one thing that we're really focusing on now, as cities like Detroit are beyond just identifying preliminary estimate of where their lead is and more focused on all right, how do we get it out of the ground? How do we logistically optimize the limited budget we have to get as much lead out of the ground as possible? That's really where we're focused on making AI useful and really making the decisions based on that AI as productive as possible. And so I think focusing on decisions, not just the predictions from AI, becomes super important.
Professor Eric Schwartz is the co-founder of Blue Conduit, a company identifying lead service lines with AI technology. Professor Schwartz, thank you for joining the Metro and talking about your work.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. We just heard from Robyn Vincent. I'm Tia Graham. Today, sunny, a high of 56 degrees expected. Tomorrow, a chance of rain and a high of 62. And Saturday and Sunday, sunny skies both days with a high in the mid-50s both of those days. Really fall weather there.
From the WDET newsroom, federal officials say Detroit and other Michigan cities aren't getting enough federal money to replace lead water pipes. The EPA's Inspector General says the agency misallocated millions of dollars to the wrong states and that it failed to verify data from those states, including Texas and Florida. How pertinent of a headline is that?
I know, it's lined up perfectly, and it speaks to exactly what it's being done in the city of Detroit to try to address this issue. So we were going to definitely follow up on that story here on the Metro. And speaking of, we do have an election coming up very, very soon. Early in-person voting has started in Detroit and begins in other communities this Saturday. You can still register to vote in person at your local clerk's office up until Election Day, November 5th. Go to WDET.org/voter guide to find accurate election information, including registration deadlines, key races, and polling locations. Now, coming up, as part of our coverage of the November election,
we'll hear from a magistrate running for judge on the 36th District Court.
on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robyn Vincent. We know local politics have major impacts in our lives, but some races aren't as sexy as others. I'm thinking about judicial contests. They receive less of the spotlight, but that doesn't mean they're any less important. Judges play a fundamental role in communities. Their decisions are supposed to balance the rule of law with honoring the rights of people navigating the justice system. In Detroit's 36th District Court, the largest district court in Michigan, 3 candidates are running for 2 open seats at a time when the court has seen big changes. That's because the court recently entered into a bail reform agreement with the ACLU of Michigan. It prohibits imposing high cash bail under most circumstances. This week, we're speaking with the candidates to see where they stand on this agreement and how they'd make Detroit's justice system more equitable. Recently, I spoke with Magistrate William Burton Jr. to hear about what he thinks are the best ways to bring justice to Detroiters. So you're a magistrate for the 36th District Court. Could you talk about a typical day in that role?
Well, today I had a small claims docket. So you can imagine the Judge Judy's, the Judge Mathises, those are my type of docket I had today, adjudicating, disputes between family members, neighbors, and so on and so forth. I also handle family arraignments, traffic matters, parking matters. It's a wide array of dockets that I have. But today was small claims, and actually it's quite entertaining.
What about some of the more serious cases that you're seeing? I'm thinking about gun violence cases, for example.
Well, on the felony arraignments, which we all have, and my day is Friday, when you have to set bond for certain people, and the more serious, allegations, You don't want those people on the street, particularly for homicides, people that have been shot at or whatever. And then people who just have possession of guns, you try to scale them down as to the degree of violence and the degree that the community can be safe, and does the person going to like to show up in court or pose a danger to the community. And you kind of scale your bonds in terms of that from least likely to commit a crime, most likely to appear, on down to the most violent and those folks that have to be locked up.
To that end, what role should the judicial system have in reducing gun violence and other kinds of violent crimes?
Well, once you get to once it comes before a judge, it's kind of after the fact and after the alleged crime is committed. In order to reduce gun violence, that's more of a community effort with the mayor and our churches and our community leaders in terms of changing the culture with respect to gun violence. The only thing we can do as who hold judicial positions is hold people accountable and deal with those after the fact, and hopefully discourage them from any further acts of violence.
Now, you used the words to search for the truth and seek justice. That's how you describe your strategy, your MO. What does that look like for you in your daily work? How do you put that into practice?
Well, it started when I was a prosecutor for 18 years for Kim Worthy, and I had a dedicated docket at 36th District Court. And I had a number, unfortunately, complaining witnesses who brought cases before the court that, quite frankly, lied. And they lied on the witness stand. They lied with their evidence or whatever. It didn't happen a lot, but it happened a number of times during my time period there. And I was personally offended. And the handful of times it did happen, I approached the bench and dismissed the case. And a lot of defense attorneys were so shocked by that I garnered a reputation for being a fair prosecutor over the years. And so, I couldn't tell you the handful of defense attorneys that they were just shocked. Once I determined that the complaining witness literally lied, and this story contradicted the video, and I couldn't, in my oath and duty, I couldn't go forward with that case, so I dismissed the case. And a lot of defense attorneys were just plainly shocked by that. They hadn't seen that before.
To shift a little bit to something that you're working quite intimately with every day, the agreement that the 36th District Court entered into with the ACLU, which has transformed Detroit's judicial system since it was enacted roughly a year and a half ago. And that agreement is centered on bail reform. And it says that the court cannot impose prohibitively expensive cash bail under most circumstances. And we know the agreement is aimed at addressing racial inequality. Now, again, you're seeing this agreement in action all the time. What is your take on it?
I can go into a 5-minute litany as to what brought this about, but there were some merit to this because based on my experience as a prosecutor, and unfortunately, some people were held in jail, incarcerated longer than they should have been due to their poverty. And the reason for that was a lot of financial management, lack thereof, collecting fines and costs. But overall, now that I've been a magistrate for a little over a year, I've seen, for me and my colleagues, I've seen it's been beneficial taking a fresh look at the bail system and seeing the numbers, and our Chief Judge McConaughey has given an opinion piece on it, that it has overall worked fairly well. And it's the recidivism rate, or the repeat offender rate, has not gone up, from what I recall correctly, has not increased in any significant manner. So it was good to take a fresh look at it. There are some tweaks we have to worry about, in terms of, trying to keep the community safe from violent criminals. But overall, I think everybody's involved has done a great job, and my colleagues who are magistrates have done a great job as well.
What do you think some of those tweaks should look like?
More information at the initial stage. In terms of, we do have the criminal history or whatever, but more information about the person in terms of where they've worked, particularly for domestic violence cases. Has there been a prior history of police coming to the house, and so on and so forth, or is it just an isolated incident? That type of information would be very, very helpful in weighing all the factors. And oftentimes we don't have that information. If there is a violent offense and the person's in the hospital, are they still in the hospital? What's their medical condition now? Those are the information we need in terms of the severity of the crime we're dealing with. How long is that person going to stay in the hospital? More often than not, we don't have that information.
So it's nuanced. It is complex, and a lot of this is existing in a grayer area in terms of like not having the context necessarily that you always need to make the best decision.
Yeah, even the flip side of this, does the complaining witness have a history of filing false reports? It works both ways. And so you want as much information with respect to the parties or whatever involved in terms of trying to make a fair and just decision. And the more information we have early on, the more likely or more comfortable I feel making a good and fair decision. Like I said, if it's come before me that the complaining witness has a history of filing false reports or filing this and that, well, that's going to weigh into my consideration for bond.
Sure. As a judge in the 36th District Court, how would you make Detroit's judicial system more equitable?
I can do that one person at a time and starting with me. I am a native Detroiter, I grew up, born here, went to Jesuit Catholic School, UD Jesuit, and went to college and law school out of state. And so I have a great sense of Detroiters growing up here, the history of the city, and the history between the police enforcement and the community relationships or whatever. And I think in my mind, I have a good sense to separate the good from the bad, read between the lines when people are trying to BS you or con you or whatever. Sixth sense, because I grew up, I've lived in Northwest Detroit all my adult life, except for the time I went to college. And I have a sense of, my community with my block club and other community groups. I've got a sense of what the people need. I see it on the campaign trail, what they're looking for. And they bring up some fair questions. They just ultimately want fairness, and they don't want anybody with an agenda. They want somebody with an open mind, of fairness, willing to listen to all sides. A lot of folks I've spoken with out on the campaign trail feel that there's a rush to judgment, prejudgment, and they haven't felt their side heard their side. They just want this fundamental fairness.
That was William Burton Jr. He's one of 3 candidates running for judge in the 36th District Court. We'll hear from the 3rd candidate tomorrow. Check WDET.org for a conversation with the first candidate we spoke with, Malika Ramsey Heath.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Getting into the weather today, sunny and a high of 56 degrees. Tomorrow, Friday, a chance of rain with a high around 62. And for the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, sunny skies both days with highs in the mid-50s.
From the WDET newsroom, the Pistons opened the NBA season by losing to the Indiana Pacers 115-109 at Little Caesars Arena. Cade Cunningham scored 28 points for Detroit, which blew an 8-point lead at the start of the 4th quarter. But we have our fingers crossed for
really do.
A good season.
Cade came out balling 28 points. That's something to be proud of, but your team lost. So it's just like we got to get them all together and rally together, and let's get some wins at LCA this year. I mean, I think about the Cam with the glasses and the jewelry, and I think about how cool that is. Let's see it happen with a winning team. That's just, well, speaking of a winning team, Lions head coach Dan Campbell addressed the reports that the NFL plans to suspend wide-out Jamison Williams. He's suspended for 2 games for violating the league's performance-enhancing substance policy. And Campbell says J-Mo gave him a straight answer, but needs to be more responsible, take accountability for your actions. Too much money's being made for you guys to do those things. Coming up. Yeah, coming up. I do have my Lion shirt on as well, so hopefully they can get it together. But coming up, a new Filipino coffee shop opened this month along Woodward and New Center.
We'll hear what inspired JP's Makes and Bakes from the shop's owner next.
This is Tia Graham.
And I'm Robyn Vincent. Jonathan Peregrino never thought the reaction to his shop would be so warm. That was until Filipinos and others from around Southeast Michigan flocked to his bakery. It's called JP Makes and Bakes. They were craving his ube cookies and other baked goods they remembered from their childhood. Producer Sam Corey sat down with Jonathan in his shop along Woodward in News Center. They talked about how his experiences in the Philippines influenced the things he serves today.
People ask me, did I ever think I was going to be doing this or this kind of baking? And honestly, like for me, I never thought I was going to be a Filipino baker. When I went to pastry school, everyone looks at like all the fancy like entremets, the croissants, those things that you see like a true pastry shop. And for me, this came out of COVID where, not being able to go out and get things or then even buy things, then it was just like, what was I missing? And it was really just like all the stuff that I grew up eating. And that's what I started to make. And I started giving it to friends. They gave it to their other friends. And people were just like, I want to order this stuff. And that's where JP Makes and Bakes sort of came from, was just me making things that I missed. The other side of it is that when you look at the Asian and the Filipino population, and it's one of those things like everyone's sort of spread apart. And so there are gatherings that I wasn't even aware of, but now opening up the shop or even just like the pop-ups that I've been doing, people are like, oh, wait. So I did a couple collaborations with Hello Soft Serve, and we had turned their soft serve into ube soft serve. And I had my cookies and my brownies there. We saw people driving over an hour to come because there was an ube soft serve. And it was just one of those ones I was like, wait, what? Like, why? I mean,
the demand was so high. Like, people really wanted this, and they were lacking it, or they missed it.
They missed that flavor profile. I mean, here's the thing, is that a lot of these treats that I'm making, I would actually be driving to Chicago or Toronto to get those. And there are people that have actually come in here that are just like so thankful that they can get fresh bread and the type of bread that they grew up with. And I was just like, I didn't really think that my impact was going to be that big. But like literally there are people like almost crying because like they're finally able to get this and not have to rely on someone coming from Chicago or this way.
You were doing pop-ups for a long time. Was the plan always to have a shop? Is this kind of the dream?
Like my own business has always been the dream. And after I left corporate and went to pastry schools, I went to pastry school in the Philippines. In Manila, it's one of the suburbs there. The reason for that was because I was just looking for somewhere to study pastry for a little bit of a shorter program that was also financially feasible for me. But with my parents and my grandparents all being from the Philippines, I'm first generation Filipino American. So I wanted to sort of go back as an adult and sort of see how it was. My parents were going to be there for half the time. My grandma was there. So I was able to spend some quality time with them in the Philippines.
Well, that's wonderful. And had you been going like back and forth as a kid a lot? Was that a constant thing?
No. My parents went back every so often, but I think we went back once when I was maybe 5. And I remember my parents actually said that they didn't want to take us back because as a little kid, I threw a little fit of being there. And they were just like, I think it was because of how American I was, that even going to like the wet markets, that I would just like out loud be like, why does it smell so bad? Or like, this is gross. And like things like that they're just like, yeah, maybe let's not do that or spend the money to fly the whole family back.
I want to talk about the space. I mean, it's really nice. It's very modern. These tables are wooden. They're very clean. You have flags, one of the Philippines, I believe, and the other is a gay pride flag. What was it like for you deciding on how to create the space? What was that process like?
It was interesting because it's like I sort of had a vision where the backside, the kitchen, I knew exactly what I wanted. Like I laid this all out to my architect, and I might have been one of her easier persons just in general for the overall, because I was like, no, this is exactly where I want this equipment, like this is how I want it specifically laid out, because I know from working in the kitchens, this is how I want it to work and to be moved. As for the customer area in the front, I just wanted to keep it sort of like clean and simple, which is just sort of like how I am, but throw in the little nods to the heritage. So like one of the things that you'll notice if you look sort of on the front counter space, there's this white tile that's built onto the case. My buddy actually etched the half of the Filipino sun that's in the flag. My front counter and sort of the chairs that are available for customers to sit on, those were made from a old workout buddy of mine just outside of Ann Arbor.
Talk to me a little bit about the food. We have a bunch of different pastries in front of us here, including some cookies that looks like a muffin. Give me the details. What are we noshing on here?
So here at the shop, I try to make sure that I have a variety of things because I sort of know where I am in the neighborhood. There's a lot of people that just walk by. And while I am doing something traditional and a lot of Filipino items, I want to make sure that the food that I'm also making is accessible to those that are around or come around. A lot of people know me in the area with my ube cookies and ube brownies. So those primarily are because of the purple color that you get.
They're a bright purple. They're like in your face. Yeah.
And ube is a purple yam that's very prevalent in the Philippines, primarily used on the dessert side. And so trying to integrate that, and I guess I call it like Filipino flavors in a familiar format. So like this is using ube in a format that people understand what a cookie is or they understand what a brownie is, and trying to introduce folks to things in that way. One of the other things that I do and have regularly is like calamansi olive oil cake, where people know what an olive oil cake is, but they're like, well, what's calamansi? So I'm able to sort of explore and explain things, but yet it's less, not, I guess in a way, like less threatening or less like awkward for them to try something because it's just a little bit of a twist.
That's so cool. You made it like an easy access for folks. Like you're making it easier for people to sort of engage and like interact and appreciate the Filipino foods.
And then like in front of you also, it's like I make a really mean chocolate chip cookie that's salted, and then there's a blueberry muffin. So like these are things that I want to have. The other thing on here is bread rolls. So I do pandesal, which is a Filipino roll. It's slightly sweeter than a normal dinner roll, but not as sweet as a Hawaiian roll. So my core is plain ones, but then I also have this version here in front of you, which is actually a coconut-filled one, which is very traditional from how I grew up eating it on the West Coast. And then I also do one that's sort of a hybridized one where I put cream cheese inside and cover it in everything seasoning. So it's almost like a bagel bite-ish, but using a different kind of bread that I'm familiar with.
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with Jonathan Peregrino, owner of the new Filipino coffee shop in New Center.
I mean, JP Makes and Bakes sounds absolutely fantastic. It is located at 6529 Woodward Avenue in Detroit's New Center. The shop's soft open hours are Thursdays and Fridays from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. So you can pop in WDT on the mobile app, take a walk, and go get some food if you're in that area, as well as Saturdays from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. I am so hungry right now.
Coming up, we'll hear about how Detroit's tech scene is changing with the leader of a new nonprofit that just got grant money to expand her organization. Metro. I'm Robyn Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. The tech industry in Detroit is growing. And as more small organizations pop up across the city, there's more support that's needed to spur this growth. Black Tech Saturdays, in partnership with Rocket Community Fund, recently passed out $120,000 in grants to close the digital divide. The goal is to make sure everyone has access to internet and other technologies, but that money is also meant to bolster the growing tech field and help local residents create their own jobs and learn new skills. Joining us now in studio to talk more about the grant they received and how it will impact their nonprofit is the CEO of Ecosphere Organics, Brittany Dabney. Welcome to the Metro, Brittany.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And then on the phone, we have Johnny Turnage, co-founder of Black Tech Saturdays. Johnny, welcome back to the Metro.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. So, Brittany, what is Ecosphere Organics? You just started in 2024, I saw, so it's very, very new. So what is it?
Yeah, so what we do is we take food waste from restaurants or farms, and then we convert that to raw materials that can be integrated into sustainable products. So if you think of your tables, your chairs, they're not just one material. It takes multiple ingredients to make that material for that object.
Yeah.
And so think of us as, an alternative to plastics or harmful chemicals.
Yeah, that's okay. That's really, really cool. So, Brittany, you currently are a PhD student at Wayne State University. You're studying microplastics, PFAS, the impact that they have on water and the environment, and solutions to that. So, why did you decide to get into this particular field, especially being a person from the city of Detroit? We live in an very urban setting. So, what was your reason in getting into this field?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Detroit. And so growing up, naturally being connected through the environment, wanting to, also protect the environment. So that's how I got into this field. And particularly, I did graduate schooling, went out of state, worked in abandoned mines. Then I came back to actually work on the topic of microplastics and PFAS. And so that's how the idea of an alternative to plastics came about.
I mean, you just threw out the mines in there, this is a little off question, but why did you do? What was the pathway there to get into working in mines?
The pathway was mainly just trying to get experience outside of the city, mainly because it wasn't at that time, especially when I was graduating from Wayne State. So I did my undergraduate here as well. There wasn't really many opportunities here that I was particularly interested in at the time. And so, I just went to Colorado State University to study the impacts of metal contamination at abandoned mines. Went to Texas Tech to study harmful pesticides on, harmful algae to see if it does have an impact on growth of harmful algae. So, I like those type of real world questions and really applying the scientific solutions to it and working with other stakeholders like those in government, those in nonprofits, other companies to try to solve these very complex issues.
And it's interesting that you say that because thinking of and speaking of working with other organizations, Black Tech Saturdays, Johnny, bringing you into this conversation, if you can, just talk a little bit about the funding, because we're talking about the grant that Brittany received with Ecosphere Organics. So if you can, just talk a little bit about the funding and why you all decided to find organizations with the specific goal of bridging that digital divide.
Yeah. So back in the spring, Black Tech Saturdays got a $320,000 grant from the Rocket Community Fund, really to help lean into bridging the digital divide. But a big part of that is when we were fundraising with them, we said we'd like to pilot something different. We called it Community Regrants. Mm-hmm. Because we sit with so many cool creatives, innovators, community leaders, we're like, we would love an opportunity to actually sow a seed into other people who have an opportunity to go deeper in lanes and who can help expose people to some of the things they're learning. Because what I do know when it comes to bridging the digital divide, it's far easier to learn from people who look like you, people who are interested in the things you're interested in. But everybody has a superpower. And since tech is going to touch everything, we wanted to create a way for both new programming to come to the city and more opportunities for doors to open. So of the $320,000, we put $120,000 to the side to re-grant 6 organizations $20,000 with the main goal of how do you help scale mass tech adoption, but kind of with your own spin to it. So we have organizations who leaned into AI. We have organizations who are going to be doing a lot of stuff with connectivity. And Ecosphere was one that stood out to us because it opened a lane into sustainability both for youth and communities, but through a lens that makes sense and how you can connect what's going on with sustainability technology to food waste. We have a ton of restaurants. We have a ton of farming initiatives in the city, and I think us figuring out how we solve for food waste and how we bring some technology into that space, it could be a very accessible entry point both for young people and other Detroiters to get jobs.
Yes, if you're just tuning in, we're chatting with the CEO of Ecosphere Organics, one of the recipients of a grant as well to help with the digital divide in Detroit. That is Miss Brittany Dabney as well. We have the CEO and the co-founder of Black Tech Saturdays, Johnny Turnage, here as well, who helped distribute the grants. So, Brittany, bringing you back into the conversation, we talked a little bit earlier about the ways that you're going to use the grant money in order to help bridge some of those things that you're seeing. So, what is your program, and what are you going to be doing, especially with the kids?
Yeah, so we're really excited about Eco Youth Lab. Basically, we're doing this to expand access to, different skill sets, to different jobs within the green economy or in climate tech, which is a growing field that we definitely don't want Detroit to get left out of. We don't want to, kind of stay in this one lane of manufacturing when we have the bio-manufacturing and bioeconomy that is growing and expanding in other parts of the world in the country. And so definitely wanting to make, especially, being from Detroit, youth here in Detroit are very interested in environmental questions and climate and sustainability. And so giving them the chance to explore other careers is really what this program is about. And it's just a very necessary thing that I see when I go out into the community and, whether going to DPS schools or working with nonprofits, a lot of people just don't know about these other careers that exist that can be very, fulfilling. And that's what this whole program is really about.
Yes, I think about just being from the city of Detroit, growing up in the city of Detroit, and just thinking, just hearing and hearing from folks and residents, that pathway for us is through Ford, GM, the auto factories, the auto plants. So for this to happen and for you to be able to reach kids at a younger age, if you can just talk about the importance, once again, you leaned into it there, but just lean into that importance of having kids ready for these new jobs that are going to be popping up, especially when we talk about climate technology.
Yeah, so just when we think about, urban environments, the density of people within the city, that creates a lot of environmental issues. And so we want to not just a lot of times we think of ourselves as separate from the environment or from nature, but really what happens in the environment directly impacts us sooner or later, down the line. And so, but the thing is, kids see that, kids know that, kids are seeing that in their TV shows nowadays. It's a very popular topic that they want to get into. So it's very important that we give them the skill sets now so that they can innovate later.
Oh, that is great. And, Johnny, before I let you go, before we get out of here, bringing you back in, will we see another round of funding and grants? I mean, I know it takes, it takes a lot to get the funding in from different organizations to help you all out, but will we see more rounds of the funding and grants that goes to addressing the digital divide in Detroit in a very unique way?
Yes. I'm going to say yes and know that it's a growth goal. We want to grow into it. For us, it's an exciting opportunity to be a new organization, to grow fast ourselves, and also be able to invest in others. And it is something that we're definitely working on and talking to our funders on how we can continue it. I think the success of the work of Black Tech Saturdays is really not just how big we can get, but how we can actually create more of us, so that way we can have ample opportunity and access for Detroiters to find themselves and see themselves in the future. So I'm going to say yes.
All right. Brittany Dabney is the founder and CEO of Ecosphere Organics, and Johnny Turnage is the co-founder of Black Tech Saturdays. I want to say thank you both for joining us on the Metro today.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's the Metro for Thursday, October 24th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show's also on YouTube if you like listening that way.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt, with additional support from Dorothy Jones. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music's done by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening. We'll talk tomorrow.
Bye-bye.